So I just wanted to give a shout out for the venture panel last week. If you didn't listen into the session by Joe and Todd and Glenn and others, it was phenomenal. So well worth it. And some real important lessons, I think, on how the world's changing came out of that. So definitely worth taking a look. The title for today is Looking Past Our Toes. And I attended a global macroeconomic conference last week, which was held on the same day as the CPI release. And the conference started at 8 o'clock in the morning, and half the people didn't come into the room until 8:45 because they were so intent on seeing what the CPI number was that they couldn't start their day. And I think it speaks to the short-termism that's going on right now. If you look back in the 1960s, the average stock on the NYSE was held for 8.3 years. It went to 5.3 years in the 70s and is now down to probably minutes if last week's conference is any indication. And I think with the dramatic rise in technology, you could expect the hold times to go down, but clearly we're in one of those periods where headlines are pretty discouraging. People don't want to be looking out too far. And we think that this is a time to be opportunistic, and there are good opportunities out there that I want to touch on. So today we're going to do three things. Take a quick look back at 22. There was a question asked last week that deserves a much better answer than I gave. And I want to talk about the opportunities that we see in 3 acts. So Anessa, if you could jump to the next slide. And Ben Graham had a very interesting statement, which was the underlying principles of sound investment should not alter from decades to decade, but the application of these principles must be adapted to significant changes in the financial mechanisms and climate. And I reread this quote pretty regularly because it's a reminder for me to check on our investment process to make sure we're adapting to what is a rapidly changing world. And when I think about the changes that have gone on over the last year, whether it's the war in Europe, the food and energy crises, the higher inflation, higher interest rates, lower growth, and the likelihood of a recession, it's easy to see why the uncertainty index has come down a bit from the peak of the pandemic, but still remains historically elevated because people really don't know how the world's going to evolve. If we jump to the next slide, that uncertainty is leading to, is coming from a lot of sources, whether it's inflation, corruption, it's feeding the seeds of social unrest. And while it's come down a bit again from where it was at the peak of the pandemic, you can see a rise up now. And I think the rise is going to continue in part because governments don't have the bandwidth to support their economies as they had in the past. Signs in Iran and also in China with street protests. I think you saw in Brazil too. There's a lot of frustration going on in the world that's showing up in the unrest, and that makes it harder to govern. If you go to the next slide, please, Vanessa. And what you can see is that's put the inflationary pressures have put a tightening cycle underway. So where we've had support from the monetary authorities, you're now having them do two things. One, not only raising rates, but adding quantitative tightening into it. I think that change is one of the most significant changes to hit the market. And I think it's the one we're struggling most to adjust to is this revaluation of interest rates, revaluation of inflation, which leading to asset values being completely revalued. So when I think about these changes, and you go to the next slide, Anessa, all this is leading to a period of slower growth. You can see the forecast for last year where the blue number is 3%, light blue is positive to the dark blue being up 6%, not many 6%ers. The pink is under is 0 or less. So you can see there was some significant areas, Russia and other areas not growing much. If you fast forward, the projections are coming down even still. So go to the next slide, Anessa. You can see the change. And again, lower growth continuing. And if you go to the next slide, that was from the IMF. The World Bank came out with their forecast for global growth. I'm sorry, this is the Purchasing Manager Index, which is showing that we're moving from earlier this year into inspection, which is the blue, to contraction, which is 50 readings 50 or below. And you can see most of the developed world and some of the emerging world is showing really contractionary signals, which leads to a global economy which is in slowing growth. And if you go to the next slide, Anessa, the World Bank will show you their numbers for growth. And we went from minus 3.2 for the world, popped up to 5.9 in 21, had a decent year this year of 3%, but we're projected to look at the drop next year of 1.7 to 2.7 the following year. And a lot of it is the advanced economies slowing down considerably, but the developing economies are not growing at similar rates. And you can see that pretty clear with China now, who was doing double-digit rates for a long time, now struggling to get to 5% growth rates. And this is really a reflection of the fact that the world is going to be challenged for some time. Growth is going to be slowed, but there are still areas to make money. So I want to switch gears now, if we can, and get to a question that was asked last week. And Anessa, you can go to the next slide, about the McCarthy voting for the House and getting this new speaker put through, and what does that mean? So I forget, but one of the questions was, what do I think of this? I gave a kind of a quick answer, and the reality is it needed a much deeper answer. McCarthy made promises that are going to be very difficult for him to keep and make it even harder for him to govern. It's going to be difficult where the Republicans are going to be set up for legislative defeats, sometimes at the hand areas. And that's going to be an issue. And the last issue is you're going to put candidates in a spot where they're going to be voting on unpopular issues. So where we went and thought we're going to have a big sweep for the Republicans in the midterms, and that was going to set them up for a positive 24. This could be a setback for them, not materially, because I don't think either party is governing particularly well, but the behavior for the Republican Party going forward is going to be a big element of how the vote plays out. And what did he do that made it more difficult? Well, he asked to have, he conceded on capping discretionary spending at 22 levels, which means that the defense budget may have to come down because of the process for getting that. It's going to be very hard to get a budget approved if you don't meet in the middle here. They put a clause in that would reject any negotiations from the Senate unless their appropriation bills are passed, meaning the House's, and that it complies with what the House sent over, and it reduces non-discretionary spending, non-defense discretionary spending. And those are non-starters as well. You had to have a balanced budget in 10 years. That's going to be very difficult. And an increase in the debt ceiling must have some budget constraint going along with it. And you can see from this, it's going to set up for a very contentious run. I think defense spending could come in a little bit. I don't think the other spending will come down that much. A big part of this is about the entitlement program that makes it very difficult for the country to be on a sustainable path to the longer term. But it is going to set up for a challenging period and will test the leadership of both parties 12 to 24 months. I think this is going to be a little bit more difficult than I thought last week. Behavior will drive a big part of that. So if we can go to the next slide. Anessa, thank you. So where are the opportunities? We see the opportunities in three acts. We have this massive reorientation of global trade going on. You have a realignment of the world order. And if certain countries have their way, it'll be realigned even more considerably. So where you can make money in this environment is through three legislative acts: the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, and the National Defense Authorization Act, which are putting massive amounts of spend into the economy, even if some of that comes down by $75 billion, which is the number that's been thrown around. They'd like to bring the budget back down by. You still have significant money flowing through the system. And that's part of what's tripping us up to the inflationary pressures, which remain more persistent than people have factored in. And the fact is, these bills are inflationary in their own ways as well. They will help stimulate the economy. It's part of what the struggle is for central banks right now. We have a lot of stimulus still working through the system from the last 2 years, which is meeting a slowing global economy of higher inflation, and how does that play out? And I think it's going to be more difficult for the Fed to engineer a soft landing with inflation at the level it's at. So I think the market's going to have to move back closer to the Fed's view that we might not get to rate cuts this year unless the economy gets in a really bad spot. So Mark, I'll stop there, and I apologize for the technical difficulties in getting started today.
No, you managed through it, Stephen. Questions, comments on?
Thanks to Anessa.
As always, thanks, Nessa. Comments, questions?
Questions?
Yes, Mark.
So it's
Morning.
comment.
And Stephen, thank you for your presentation again. Question for you, Stephen, regarding the the social unrest index. In your opinion, what is that source of unrest, and is it systemic? Is it permanent, or is this something that comes and goes?
I think we're in. That's a great question, and I think there's two elements to it. I think some of this comes and goes, particularly when you're coming out of a period where there was a lot of support, and the support goes away, and then people start to wonder, why are they not getting support still? And that leads kind of the inequality issue starts to rear its ugly head there. So I think that's one element of it, but I think we're just in a period where there's so much change going on, and there's so much access to information that people are looking for. They're looking for more, and they're looking for more to come back to them. And I think they're getting frustrated with their lot in life. And I think you're seeing that in some of the policies in Iran, for example, where Hamlet pointed out that when you're going protest in the streets there, you're taking your life into your own hands. That's a different sign than what we've seen typically. So I think it's a little of both. I think in some of the developed countries, it's more frustration with the pace of government. In other countries, it's much bigger, and I think it's more of a trend.
Thank you, Raj. You have a question?
I just want to point something out with social unrest.
Mark, I think we have I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that. With the social unrest that we have, it's kind of like we have it almost every decade. We have something major happening around the world for almost every country. However, the problem is some of the social unrest that happens once the dust settles. The government goes around and tightens up the screws, and that doesn't allow more things happening, and which it could be a mass execution, it could be deportation, it could be prison, it could be all those things, and at the same time they will tighten the security, and which can be very sad for the people inside those countries. However, with the next one that's possibly going to happen, we have to figure out, we have to predict it, which one when it's going to happen, and we have to make sure that if it's happening, we do it all together. It can be just one-sided, and just people just go and with no support or anything. So that's my point of view from that, and we might see more social unrest in the future, but I'm not sure exactly how long. But it's better to have some sort of prediction and have some sort of game plan before getting turned down and all that stuff too.
Any other comments, questions? Rob Colorina.
Come on, Rob. You always have
Give me
a
a moment to
comment.
catch up here.
Yeah, Camille Hamzi.
Well, I'll have a comment in short due course, but for the next
He has
5 minutes.
to listen for a minute. That's Camille, what's your comment on these
No,
subjects?
my comment that Rob Colorina should always have a comment.
I know, but seriously, he'll give him 5 minutes. He will, I promise. What's your comment on or question on all this?
Is that for me or Rob?
That's for you. That's for you.
I think this conversation require a bottle of Johnny Walker and also a group that agree on the love of this country. I am an immigrant. I came here as a student many years ago with a dream, definitely. And for me, my dream came true, and more dreams to come because I have grandchildren. So those are my new dreams. But what is going on? There is a lot of there are a lot of mistakes being made by legislators, and writing a book about the absence of leadership in the world, and specifically in the greatest country and the greatest economy on the planet today. There are a lot of mistakes being made that are causing this frustration. You know, I was speaking at the Black Entrepreneur Annual Convention, which I am a speaker there, designated every year now. This is the 4th year. And they asked me the questions because I am the only non-African American speaker among 42 speakers. And for example, I criticized that here in this country, we still use the word color so frequently. I remember when I came here, Mark, my fellow students in New England in the university, they said, Camille, there are certain words in English here in America you cannot say. You cannot say this word, that word, which you all know. One of them was, do not use the term colored people. I said, okay. But now, 40 years later, I see all the intellects, other fellow speakers, other fellow PhDs, they're using the term people of color. So what they did, they just reversed it from colored people to people of color. We should be focused on eliminating the term color for the gentleman that spoke about the social unrest. That term is just a taboo for this country due to history, not due to this generation. Instead of referring always to people that are challenged economically, calling them people of color, minorities, brown people, black people, this is all wrong. You know, we can use more refined terminologies that do not separate us by the size of our wallets. I can say challenged communities. I can say communities that are in dire need of improved services. But we don't have to use that term color all the time, because as long as we use the term color, there will always be social unrest, because we have so many colors in this country, and that's what this country is all about. And thank you.
Thank you, Camille.
I think that's well stated, given yesterday was Martin Luther King Day. Should be the content of their character, not the color of their skin.
We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Rob, did that buy you time also to have your comment? You're on mute.
Yeah,
You want to?
more so. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so maybe change the perspective. One is I'm on the board of minorities and restructuring and alternative investments, and I think Andy Fish is on the line. He was previously at InvestCorp, which is out of Bahrain. But to your thought, Mark, I'm actually here in South Florida and the Keys, and catching up a little bit with Adam Blanco for the day. And your challenge of Davos the other day inspired me to travel from San Francisco to out here. And I was just catching a little bit of the commentary on diversity, and I agree. Best
I'm just seeing the both of you. You guys used to fight to be the first question, and now here you are actually sitting next to each other.
Yeah. Actually, I tried fishing out here today and wasn't as lucky, but I got a little swim in. But on this important topic of diversity, just a couple quick thoughts. One is that, Camille, your point's well taken. And during COVID, I think there was friction amongst different diversities, in the characterization of of COVID as the China virus. And I'm Philippine, so just open to Asian input. but it's important for us to work together. It's important for us to compare notes and best practice share. It's important for us to work with people of non-diversity. And I think what's been good about 361 as well is, you all have been very inclusive to things like military and disabled, and there's other areas that diversity has gone into, including frankly, the mental health side. So I applaud this as being both a topic, but then the other side of things is the business case and opportunity set. I think the Latino and in particular the Asian American population is a huge factor in consumer growth. I think 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, Mark, here in Florida, I commented with respect to how some legislation with respect to the BlackRock allocation of it being constricted due to ESG. That's an important topic. And some of it's for short-term political either progress or notes. But I think as a community that also has to be addressed intelligently with data, with performance, but with policy. So I'll sort of pause there and see what that has stimulated, hopefully something.
I like seeing you at an angle at the same time in front.
Oh, I can't hear them.
So carrying on, other comments on this theme or otherwise?
You should comment on.
Yeah, Mark, quick follow-up on this. Going back to the policy, specifically with the central bank in.
You guys got to get your mics fixed.
While waiting for that, we still have an 8:30 shift to your man
We do.
chair.
We do. I'm in keeping an eye out for him. I talked to him earlier this morning. He's going to come on.
I'm here.
Thank you.
Ah, there you are. Just not on. Are you going to come on camera too, Chance? There you go. I don't know. Were you able to pick up on some of this that we've been talking about, Chance? That Camille kicked off. It might segue to reflecting on Dr. King. You're on mute.
There we go. Sorry about that.
Wait, I don't know. When did you join our conversation?
Just a few minutes ago.
Okay. So we were talking about unrest, which
Mhm.
led to a discussion from Camille about how people talk about color, people of color,
Mhm.
and why are we so focused on that? How do we get beyond that? But in any event, I love that we have you with us. I need more of you. I had you every day as my roommate for a while, but now but it's timely that you can come, and just how are you and the King Center and otherwise looking at the legacy and your mission today?
Well, thanks for having me, Mark. And yeah, I do want to spend more time with you all, and I look forward to that this year. And I'll say that the color topic is one that's fundamental, in the King conversation. There's a famous interview of an MLK about 11 months before he was assassinated. Guy Sander Van Oker from NBC interviewed him, and the interview starts off with a very provocative question from the reporter, which was, "What is it about the Negro? Why can't the Negro overcome, the issues?" We've seen any number of immigrants come, folks from Europe, folks from different parts of the world come to America and do fine. And the nature of the question suggests that there's something wrong with Black people, right? But of course, King was very poised and elegant and artful in describing that you know, there's something about the color of a black person. You know, what has happened is we've allowed it to become a stigma and actually a means to degrade and humiliate and demean the entire race. And so that legacy there, which has been in place for hundreds of years, it still remains. You know, we can't escape it. Well, we can't escape. We actually can escape it. You know, and I'll pivot to this past weekend. You know, yesterday we had the annual commemorative service at the Ebenezer Church across the street from the King Center in Atlanta. And the guest speaker was Brian Stevenson. Some of you may know Brian Stevenson. He's a famous attorney and really, he's the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative. And they have exonerated hundreds of wrongfully incarcerated felons who are on death row. Many are on death row. So he's you know, been able to save these folks, many of these folks, from being electrocuted or spend the rest of their lives in prison. And he talked about in his remarks that you know, if you go to, I don't know if you any of you spent time in Berlin, you know, different parts of Germany, or if you spent time in South Africa, you know, but these are countries and places which have a dramatic examples of racism and discrimination and torture and killing, you know, based on race and hate. And those are nations that have fully engaged about the history of those experiences and that torture. And so you can't, you know, if you spend time in Berlin, you can't walk 2 blocks without seeing some memorial, tribute, query, sign about the Holocaust. And they encourage people to visit the memorials and get the full story, curriculum in the schools. Every student in Germany has a deep knowledge of what happened. And, you know, similar in South Africa, you know, they make a really big deal of the museum there, the Apartheid Museum. And so until America really gets into a place of honesty and truth and reality about the story of the Black people, even in the instance of our emancipation, you know, by Abraham Lincoln, you know, at the same time the slaves were freed, you know, they were given nothing, no financial foundation, no land, no nothing. And at the same time, the, you know, white peasants from Europe were by the thousands eligible and took advantage of the giving away of free land out west and in the Midwest. All the land grant, you know, you hear about these land grant colleges, Texas A&M, that's agriculture and mechanical. So those are all those schools are part of a bigger program where they were building out these parts of our country. And for $5, you could apply. And if you got your parcel, the government would fund your machinery. They would fund your training and education so you could understand how to farm. You could take out loans. And so that has just, even that instance, I mean, just millions and millions and millions of white people today have generational wealth created by that program, which Black folks really couldn't take advantage of. And so that's quite a segue, I know, but there is this race thing is not a joke. It's not something from the history that's in our distant past that means nothing. It's very, very relevant today. And there is still a stigma. I'm a successful Black man. I'm an attorney. worked for Oprah Winfrey. I've lived in, $1 million home zip code after the next, DC, Chicago, here, New York now. And I'm still paranoid. The tail light goes out of my car, I fix that thing the next day because I don't want to be pulled over. I don't. And so we have to deal with this. And I think it starts at it starts in our homes, but it also starts in our organizations, so we can have these super clear conversations about what race means and what is the legacy here. I think, we use Germany and South Africa as examples. That doesn't mean you have to feel ashamed or guilty. Let's just be real about what is the history, what has happened, and then we can actually have like real dialogue. But we are at a point in the country where you have one school district after the next actually trying to reduce the history and remove the facts from our schools curriculum, so our children don't know what really happened. So that is the part that I fear, is actually that we have an attack on the truth. We're in a total post-truth society now. And so until we actually commit as citizens to elect leaders who are going to commit to the facts and not dwell, not create crazy stories. I mean, this whole movement has been framed around, well, we don't want our white children to feel embarrassed or ashamed or guilty. I mean, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I mean, I'm ashamed to know that our politicians are actually invoking our children's guilt as a prop for fueling, a racial fantasy. So I'll stop there. You asked a straight up question, but
Yeah, you're keeping it real.
It's just, there's a reality, and so
right.
and I'll say, relative to the King Center and the nonviolence philosophy and methodology, step one in the nonviolence work is information gathering, right? So if there's an injustice, we purport to see an injustice out there, the first thing we do is do our homework. Okay, so can I give you an example?
Sure.
Okay, so we've spoken about the Brittany Griner situation when it was in progress, and saying that it was justice demands that she be released. And later there was a time when Paul Whelan, who was another American in prison there, there was a conversation around him being part of a swap with Brittany. And when the calls came into us about speaking about Paul and demanding his freedom, when the calls came in originally, we didn't do that. We didn't include him because we didn't really know we didn't know the facts around his incarceration or his prosecution or his imprisonment, right? So until we were to do that homework, we wouldn't say anything, right? And I think there's a lesson there, right? It's not just, and that's not because he's a white guy or anything like that. We just do our homework. And I think there's something about that where we have to deal in the facts. We have to do our homework. We have to stop judging prematurely if we don't know what we're talking about. So that's something critical that Dr. King demanded in any pursuit of justice. We would do our homework first before we comment. And so imagine how that would play out on social media. so much judgment and shot calling and labeling going on, and people don't even know what they're talking about. Right. So there's a discipline.
By the
around-
way, they may not even be the ones talking. It's all bot and
Yeah.
AI driven.
Yeah. That's part of the whole
Yeah.
post-truth, environment we're in. So, it's a call to action for us as business leaders, as investors, as parents, as citizens. We really have to stop and just make sure you know what you're talking about, and really do it from a place of love. I mean, you have to care. And so, that's why I think this Kingian nonviolence philosophy and methodology is so relevant. It's just so relevant. It actually influences how you behave and think and speak on a day-to-day basis, not just something where you're thinking about racism. It's actually about the culture of our country, of our homes, of our schools. And so it's very motivating, because I use it as a tool to help coach executives, to help around DEI programs, but really it's just a way to do business. It's a way of life. There was a hand raised about 4 or 5 minutes ago when I was ripping there. Sorry.
That was Rob.
Hey, Rob.
Yeah. Hey, thank you very much, Chance. That was from the heart. Just two quick thoughts. Yeah, I was in Africa for almost 3 years, and our group had 800 jobs there in circuits. So I things are improving, and in fact, someone like Oprah Winfrey and her foundation, when she set up that educational girls and women, that was just a force multiplier in terms of the progress made and the examples for America and diversity. The second thought, and Mark, you may have input or some of the,
You may want to go off video, Rob.
the World Cup and the soccer teams, where they have some players of diversity backgrounds on some of the, just some of the unfair playing field, but they've got to play through it. And probably one of the best players of the world, Mbappe for France.
I'm going to turn your video off.
Some of that sort of is around it. But, I think a lot of these folks are leading by example and doing a thing, nose to the grindstone. If you have any thoughts with respect to, the organized sports, particularly over there, in this, I'd be curious to that.
It's a question of Chance.
Yeah, I only heard a part of that, Mark.
So obviously, he was paying tribute to Oprah, when you were part of that.
Mhm.
Actually, I don't know if I could. Another fun fact is Chance really helped Obama, Oprah, and Obama. That was an interesting time for you, being director of communications. But I think the question, he was making a comment about just basically racism in professional sports, particularly soccer, in certain environments. But I didn't know if that was a comment or a question, Rob.
It's I would welcome your inputs, because I only follow soccer so much, but because of 361's global side. And
I mean, I myself, having lived in Russia for 8 years, this is unfortunately par for that course.
Oh yeah.
And not just, and obviously in parts of France and other countries, this continues. This is not over. Bill?
No, it's
Sure.
not. And I think it's, I know our conversation started around race and, the meaning of it in our country and how it's, but, the bigger point, I think, to take it to really the business and investing world is that, we're talking about truth. We're talking about the reliability of information. We're talking about facts. And so, what you could see how it leaps from a false narrative about race, right? This insinuation that Black people are more dangerous or are not as capable or are inadequate intellectually, or whatever the case may be. All these connotations. It morphs beyond that. If the point I'm making is, if there's a narrative that's continually repeated, which is not true, it's not real, right? I'm as smart as anyone on this call, right? Even the Michigan graduates, I'll say I told it. Okay. But so we know, even, just in our common sense, that's not real, right? But by buying into it and kind of letting it permeate how we exist, other things that we know aren't real or are not true, we tend to accept. Like, I'm gonna be a little bit political here. Like, we're allowing for a big segment of the country, and at least at the leadership level, to ignore January 6th and the significance of it. And the same people who were cowering in the aisles and in their offices in fear of their lives are now acting like that didn't happen. Or we're creating these fictions around voting fraud and, all kinds of things, right? And so it just becomes this world of disinformation, right?
And what's the fourth rail, being journalism, is caught up in the echo chambers now.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no verification.
But I like keeping it interactive. So let's Bill, you had a comment, question, and Camille after.
Yeah, sure. No, just kind of to follow on your point, Chance, of false narrative. I'm working with as a member of a special counsel at the Private Directors Association, and there are probably about 18 of us, all institutional investors, many of them representing very, very large pools of capital. And our mandate is to write up a new set of best practices. And I think that one of the initiatives in that certainly is DEI, but we're trying to go beyond representation.
Right.
Because clearly there is there's ample evidence if people want to dig into it. And in fact, it's a lot of it is more qualitatively evident. It's a little more difficult to get, actual reports and things like that, but trying to go to the economic benefits of having, true, beyond color, but diverse thought on boards and having different representations there. We're trying to do something to codify that and put it out there. It's still a work in process, but I'm really privileged. I'm truly privileged to be part of that group. And there's some great guys, who and women who are doing, putting some good thoughts together. So we're trying to make some progress there. And I think that, if we all had the, perspective of one blood, like a lot of this stuff melts away.
Right. It's a shared humanity. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because with many of the companies I work with, there's a challenge here, because the whole DEI thing, I'll be casual about it, that, it's a bit unfortunate that it starts with D. The phrasing starts with D, and I actually believe that you don't start with the D.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because people then think it's really about the quotas and the percentages and all those things. And really it's about, before you get to the diversity part of it, is actually about the inclusion, the equity, the state of mind of people, right? I mean, Mark and I practiced together in Cleveland, and at that time I was the only Black attorney at the firm. Mark worked at another firm, but we had 200 lawyers. I mean, there's a joke. My future wife, Laura, she called the law firm to ask who was the new black attorney, you know, secretly inviting me to a party that Mark and I went to, and obviously it worked out very well for me. But the politically incorrect receptionist said, "Oh, you mean the black attorney? There's only one black attorney here. That's Chance." Okay, now jokes aside.
Yeah.
Jokes aside, what do you think happened there when the firm wanted to attract more diverse attorneys? And so anyone that was looking at joining that firm, be it a law student, a lateral hire, a new partner, they would call me and say, "Chance, how is it?" And I said, is it perfect? No. Have there been moments that are awkward? Yes. But they are trying. They are committed to this. I've been to more, I'll be casual with you guys here, more white partners' homes and hanging out at the pools with their kids than you'd ever believe. Okay? Going the extra mile to make me feel included, right? And so by the time, Mark left a few years later, I left a few years later, I think we had 7 black lawyers. Okay? So you have to start from the place of, is this creating a culture, creating a sense of inclusion, feeling like people want you there, people want you to succeed in your career at this place. And then you can talk about hiring more females and more black folks and all the other isms. You deal with that over time. And so I think you're right to lay out what do you want to achieve from a culture standpoint, and what are the values that you want to stand by, and then the diversity can follow from there.
Camille, I know Andrew both have comments, questions. Camille, did you want to weigh in?
Mark, what is the gentleman's name? The attorney.
Chance.
First name.
Chance.
Chancellor.
Chancellor, if you want to go.
Oh, Chance. Beautiful. Chancellor, my name is Camille Homsi, and I spoke before you came in, where I commented on the negative impact of using the term color in America so frequently. I am an immigrant, and I came here to school in the end of 1973, beginning of 1974 at a very young age, and then attended university in New England. And among what I don't mean to be redundant, I just wanna. There was one comment that I mentioned before you came online. They warned me of certain words and vocabulary not to use, and one of them was the term "people of color." And my comment today was, how come today all the intellect and speakers, including people in the academia, they switched it from people of color from colored people to people of color? I said, why don't we do away with that term color? Why don't we call those communities that are instead of using minorities? Because I think that's condescending just as bad, or maybe on the list of being bad negative comments. Why don't we use more in economically challenged community, underserved communities? Just like when we worked, and I was among those who worked with Senator Tim Scott prior to Donald Trump. I mean, because Senator Scott worked on the Opportunity Zone legislation for quite a few years, and with his team and with a group of advisors, where the directive to the governors of the 50 states and the territories is to select maximum of 25% of underserved zones or parcels or census in his or her particular or respective state to designate it as an opportunity zone. And in total, we came up with the number 8,762 zones today. Good. But here's something else, which many of it was not fairly selected because there was no oversight. And that lead me always back in all my social or geopolitical discussions to lack of true, genuine leadership. Now, going back with the United States on here, I want to address on one of your comments about education. And you mentioned, and you can tell me after if I was wrong, I am fine, about emphasizing on always bringing back history. Okay, and I don't want to be misunderstood. I never want to give away history. I come from a country that claimed to be the country or the people who delivered the first alphabet, and also St. Paul, and also the oldest dynasties with algebra and geometry and everything. And I was born in Syria. Okay, but here it is. In 1960, during the unrest of the streets, the population of the United States was, I'm looking at several screens around me, the population was 179 million. And then in the year 1970, it was 205 million. Today, we are pushing close to 335. And with the open borders, we lost numbers. What I want to say, there are many kids that came with those immigrants from Europe that you mentioned, and from other countries, from Asia, from the Philippines, just to include Robert with us in the conversation, and also from the Middle East, from many places. And they didn't know about what happened in America. It was delivered to them through their own media. Now, do we have to always tell those kids, if they were of whatever color, that, look, that's what happened in America. You are inferior. You are not capable. You cannot handle an aircraft, just like the Tuskegee boys. You cannot perform. I think that's inflammatory. We need to come up with a comprehensive educational system and a plan and a strategy for a transition where we take our society forward by reminding people, like in my world, we kill each other because we are Sunni and Shia, because we are Christian Orthodox or Christian Catholics. So every society has its own problems. And today, I've been to South Africa. Actually, I've been in most of the 46 African countries due to my line of business, and definitely made friends in every one of them. And they do not feel what the American African community feels. And they don't see the need for all those reminders. So I need your feedback. Maybe if you're gonna be, and I hope you are attending in Florida, I'll carve the time to sit down, shake hands, and face to face, and continue this conversation, but only to bring solutions.
Absolutely.
Because there are instigators in the world. We can name many of them today. They're spending money to see turmoil in America, to bash the Black Lives Matter by having thugs behind them, okay, burning stores. That's not the Black demonstrators' action. That's not what they went to the street for. They went to the street for other reasons, to eradicate the fear that you have when you leave the house, where you don't want to be stopped by a cop for any traffic violation. And for many other reasons, for treatments in jails, for treatments when they are in precincts. I'll stop it here. I see Mark looking at the watch. We need to come up with that. We need the strategy.
Yeah. I'd love to have you down in Florida, Chance, but we're playing pickleball. We'll talk about that later. But you want to respond?
Can I give one small response?
Yeah.
So I would love to have a longer conversation for sure. I just want to make it clear. My point was not to suggest that we simply need a reminder. This is not merely to, stimulate some kind of credit or mark the moment and say, see all the terrible things that have happened to Black people, and you better not forget it. It's much more than that. What I'm saying is that I'll make 2 points with it and stop. One is all the folks that you mentioned, all the nationalities of the various immigrants that have come to our country, and even today, all of those folks came voluntarily. Black people didn't come here voluntarily. So we're really we're an immigrant of a different kind in that respect. And secondly, part of the reason we should be curious and actually cultivate an understanding of the Black history is, I think it actually would, in a manner of speaking, form a sense of Black excellence. Okay, in that, if you look around the South, and much, throughout the South, most of those cities were built by Black architects, Black engineers, Black players. It's an amazing amount of production and work and contribution of folks who just happened to be slaves at that time. And so if we were to actually take a step back from the torture part of it and just say, look at what Black people have contributed even in the time of being forced to do so, and really celebrate all of that. And then even today, I mean, sitting in that Ebenezer church yesterday, there was, but the talk was about love. How can we create a love-centered way of life, a way of shared humanity? We're all humans, as Bill mentioned. And so, I don't think the spirit of it is one where we're trying to shame anyone or anything like that. We're saying, let's take this to a higher level. Let's build community, build the beloved community that Dr. King talked about. Not a shame, build community, not a we should be, everybody should be paying the price for this. This is just, let's just be open about what Black folks have done and what happened to them, and understand that there's these stigmas have been created, and we have that conversation, and we deal in the truth around it, and then I think there's a sense of liberation for everyone. I'll stop there.
Well, Camille is frequently in New York if he can't make it down to Miami.
Let's do it. I'd love to.
No, I will be in Miami at the end of the month, and definitely I'm going to stop by the Eden Rock to say hello, and definitely to make new friends. Like now I'm looking at one in front of me.
Let's do it. And I want to say, Mark, as we're closing on this, that what is so powerful with this, right? If we can, in our organizations or as investors, if we can deal with this very emotional, touchy, controversial conversation, I've seen this happen in the dozens of leadership teams I've worked with. When we can deal with this, we can deal with anything. We can deal with any customer problem. We can deal with any investor problem. We can deal with any product problem. We can deal with any software problem, right? And so actually, I think the organizations that have a handle on this and don't approach it from a place of shame and blame and guilt and trying to sugarcoat it and just say, this actually happened. This is how it's showing up in our culture. This is how it's showing up in our organization at times. Then there's nothing you can't do. There's nothing that's out of bounds to deal with as a problem that can be worked on together as a leadership team. So that's what I see. I see these CEOs who have taken the challenge of the George Floyd incident and kind of the wake up call that, wait a minute, we actually don't have ourselves together on this race thing or this discrimination thing or violence thing. And it actually catapulted them into a new way of actually dealing with each other and leading and being vulnerable and saying, wow, I'm actually kind of blind to this.
And what's interesting is that politicians can't really, they keep messing it up. But companies, boards, Bill's talking about these directors, they really help. They're the ones in the customers, right? The market wants inclusion.
Right.
And that's really like the triple wins to be, I won't name the company, but my wife worked at Univision in 2004. We moved it out from Russia, and there was a particular brand that didn't want to dilute their brand by marketing to Hispanics. Imagine that. Huge emerging market inside our country. And they've fortunately have evolved, I think, because the market speaks. So it's a win-win-win. And that's what the 360 is. I do roundtables, but I like the idea that everybody should be at the table so we can have that discussion. Even our mutual friend, Steve Rosen, we all make better decisions. We have more people at the table, more diversity of thought.
Yeah.
It's just a win all around.
Yes, I do think this all has major implications for how we do business, how we run our businesses, how we invest. And so, that's what I like to really focus on. I mean, obviously King's speeches were magnificent and inspiring, but the work is actually in the practice of these steps of nonviolence. How do you engage in a nonviolent way? How can you be curious? How do you gather the facts first before you start talking and engaging, right? So that would be my challenge to all of us on the call.
Have you met Jack Wyant?
Mm-mm.
So he grew up in Newark, Ohio. Jack, are you on the call real quick? Can you unmute yourself? At Denison University, he's another pioneer. It takes a lot of pioneers. 1967 or 8, they pledged the first African American to a white Christian fraternity, and he was brought to Washington D.C. and shown, this is white Christian. You can't do that. He went back to his brothers at Denison, basically said, this is what they told me. And they had a unanimous vote to pledge that young man. And I want to say, I'm going to steal your thunder, Jack, but I think a year or two later, dozens of fraternities changed his fraternity. You tell it better, Jack.
Well, the white Christian clause, pardon me, for Phi Gamma Delta, or Fiji as it's known, which has about 150 houses on college campuses in the US, was written in 1848 and was never modified subsequent to that. And in 1967, as you just said, we violated the so-called white Christian clause, pledged Herb Booker of Columbus, Ohio, who was an outstanding young student, who was one of the few persons of color to matriculate at Denison. Now I think there's a 30% level, but at the time it was 1%. And it was the first pledging of a Black student by any of the major US fraternities. And you're right, within 2 years, Phi Gam had a 51-49 vote at an annual conference and changed that provision that had lasted for 120 years. And so did a number of other fraternities follow. But it was the first pledging of its kind in the country.
And you have to see Jackson Maverick. He sort of, he sort of orchestrated it. Now he's one of us. He leads our 361 Ohio Tech Fund, and I'll give him the football anytime to carry. But he carried that football well back in '67.
I love that story. Well, I'll just leave you with this bigger idea I'm trying to convey, and I'll repeat, which is, yes, there is a very deep-seated dimension of racism in the United States, and the color of still has, a major effect on much of what we see and experience. But there is a way, right? There is a way to deal in facts and truth. And what I really believe is the organizations and the leaders that have the courage and the vulnerability to talk about what's working and what's not working in their organizations around these issues. If it's gender, if it's gay and lesbian issues, if it's race-based, when you're able to communicate around that and function, that you're creating a cultural competency. You're creating a competency. That's a skill there. That's a capability, right? That translates into how you deal with your customers, how you deal with your board, how you deal with investors. It's a whole thing, right? It's a skill. So, I'm encouraging you to think about it in those terms, because we may not all be in a position where Jack was and had to kind of turn into a hero, right? We don't really want too many people being heroes, right? We want it to be a community-based way of interacting and engaging and being curious and open. And then I think you get better performance out of your teams and workers, and people want to stay longer. So that's what I really try to aspire to around this work. Not so much as I want you to be able to recite every major event of the civil rights movement. This is really about how do we want to build a culture that's love-based and connected and open to learning and being engaged with each other. That's what winning, that's motivating for me. And I see leaders who have made that shift and become much more effective in their work and inspiring their teams and such. So hope that doesn't sound too, esoteric. I think it's to me very practical. But just I think around this time of year, especially with MLK being in tribute, people tend to default to the race and discrimination part and forget it's really about a mindset shift. So speaking of preachers, I'll stop preaching, Mark. But
this was great. Let's sync up. We gotta on these things, and even just let's put it into.
Yeah,
I'm sure a lot of people would benefit from that kind of interaction. I'd be even open for maybe some self-selected people would want to go carry this conversation on.
And we have there's a
maybe a chance you could put your contact info, and I don't know if you're open for when we share this with our community, if they can contact you to have
Sure.
those.
And I'll say there is a workplace version of the nonviolence training that the King Center offers. It's a 3-hour course, and folks could get, a really good basic exposure to the nonviolent, and it's available. So, there's a way for all of your employees to take this. I think it's about $20 a student. So it's $20 an employee. So, fairly affordable. So they can hear for themselves directly from the King Center and how this all works. So, but happy to help. Love to continue the conversation individually or at the next boondoggle, meeting. And appreciate you guys.
Let's come to